Okay. Good morning, everybody. And let's first begin with a blessing. We'll say a bracha, and you're welcome to answer Amen to the blessing. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Shehakol Niya B'Dvaro. Here we go. So, today's class, as you can see, the title of the class is Unorthodox Part 2, as well as Social Unrest, which we discussed, I think last week, or maybe a little before that. So, I want to give you this introduction over here. What, after I gave the review, my review on the Unorthodox series, the Netflix series Unorthodox, I received quite a bit of feedback. And much of the feedback was, not much, I mean, there was, part of the feedback was that although I clarified and I repeated saying several times that I did not watch the series, people said to me and asked, please watch the series because we want to hear some of your thoughts on the series, not just sort of a general idea, but a little bit more the series about the series itself. So I watched the series in this past week. I watched the series, and first and foremost, I had to skip a couple of scenes. The good thing on Netflix is that it's very easy to skip. So some scenes, of course, as part of my feedback is some scenes are not appropriate, especially not for a rabbi, but not at the, scenes that we've all become perhaps desensitized based on what's out there, but not a scene that should be skipped. Let's say it in as straight as it is. But I want to give an introduction. I want to study Torah because my main objective is studying Torah. I'm not a movie critic. That's not what I do. But I think that when you have a production like that, instead of hearing and getting impressions only from a side which is perhaps not a Torah perspective, it's good, and people want to hear what the rabbi has to say. So after watching the series, I'll try to be, I don't remember every single scene, but I'll just try to give some thoughts. And I want to also, of course, connect it to a Dvar Torah, because that is our main objective, is to share Torah. So I want to begin with a Torah question, and then go into some of my ideas, and then finish off with the answer on the Torah question that I will ask. I give you some thoughts and etc. So the portion that we just read, that we're coming from, is called Parshat Bahalotcha, which is the portion in Numbers, in Bamidbar, and the first mitzvah that the Torah tells us is the following, and I will just read it. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moshe so to say, Daber el Aharon, speak to Aaron, Aaron meaning his brother, Aaron the high priest. V'amartei love, you should say to him the following, Baha'alotcha tanerot, when you will kindle the menorah, or literally translated, when you will raise up, which was my short Dvar Torah for last week, so I won't go into that in detail. El mul pnei ha-menorah ye'ir shevet ha-nerot, the menorah the different candles should face the center candle, as the wick, and as you're lighting the candle, should face the center candle. So here we have the mitzvah in the Holy Temple of lighting the menorah, and who is given that mitzvah? That mitzvah is given to Aharon the high priest, to light the menorah. And the question I want to pose over here is, why is it Aharon who lights the menorah? Why not Moses? Moses, the leader of the Jewish people, why is it not his mitzvah to light the menorah? Now, the simplest answer is that all the services in the temple were basically done by the Kohen and by the priests. Moshe Rabbeinu was a Levi, he was from the tribe, he was a Levite, he was from the tribe of Levi, but he wasn't a Kohen. Granted, but I'm looking for something more, and the message and the lesson, which we will discuss a little bit later on. Now let's get to the review of some of my thoughts, and some of questions that I have. And I want to also say that since we're here doing Sunday morning learning and Torah and coffee, etc., there is a an individual that if I see him on here, I'd like him actually to come on because he has life's experience, and I'd like him to join us over here. I tried calling him a couple of times before I started the class. I could not reach him. Okay, so let me go to the film or the series, and let's talk about some of the issues as I see it. And I want to give an introduction, not an introduction, but a story. And I want to explain in my story why I am biased in a sense. And the bias comes in the following manner. As I mentioned in the past, as a child, as a very young child, sadly I lost my dad. My father passed away. He was a Holocaust survivor, come from a very prominent family, and he passed away at a very young age. When he passed away, I just turned 5, and for probably a year and a half before that, he was in the hospital with struggling with lung cancer. This is after he went through Auschwitz and survived. Only his brother and himself, he and his brother, are the only two that survived. I think 5 or 6 siblings were murdered by the Nazis, their parents, and almost all their immediate first cousins, and so on. My mother, should be well, till 120, was left with raising 3 orphans. We lived in Borough Park. We lived in Borough Park. For some of you who know Borough Park, give me a thumbs up if you know Borough Park, a wonderful Jewish neighborhood. If you know Borough Park, give me a thumbs up so I get some feedback here from those watching. So we lived in Borough Park. We lived on 12th Avenue between 55th and 54th Street. That's where we lived, Borough Park. Our landlord, as it is called in Brooklyn, who my mother paid rent, was a Jew by the name of Lemu Schwartz. And he was our landlord, and he was an extremely kind individual. And as a young boy, I had 2 sisters. As a young boy, he had another boy who we developed a very nice friendship, and he in some ways took me under his wing, which means he would take me to shul on Shabbos often, to the Satmar synagogue in Borough Park, and would take me on rides, in the car together with his son. And Shabbos afternoon, he would sit and study Talmud, and he would pass out chocolate to us. He was just a very, very kind individual. And in fact, when my stepfather, my mother remarried, my stepfather passed away a couple of years ago, they came to pay a shiva call, and then I heard another amazing story about him, which fits into his character. Another amazing story about him, and that is that there was a fellow in the community, in the, I guess, broader Satmar community that lived in Borough Park. I think it was a Borough Park, maybe Williamsburg, that I think became ill and was working for a company, and because of his illness, he could not really perform his duties, and the company basically could not carry him. He couldn't perform his duties, and they were going to fire him. So this Lemu Schwartz, in a discretionary way, or not discretionary, in a confidential way, I guess you could say with discretion, but in a confidential way, approached the owner of the company and said to the fellow, he says, "Look, I will single-handedly cover this person's salary. He shouldn't know about it, so that his dignity is not affected. He should not know about it. I want him to continue to work for you. I'll pay, and this way he could continue to support his family in a dignified way." This was an amazing story. How many people would do that? I say this story because that's where some of my bias towards the Satmar community, which is where this whole unorthodox life struggle is happening. So I have this bias because of one individual, and that creates somewhat my reality. We all judge and look at things from our reality and our life's experience. I will say I also have some negative experiences with Satmar, which I will maybe elaborate at personal experience. But I don't like to sit here in public and discuss negatives about a Jewish group. But I could discuss things that I disagree with them or disagree with their approach on things, and that we could definitely discuss. But just an outright negativity or a bad story occurrence, I'm not looking to share that over here. It's not the place and time. So let's now talk about some of the things that are the core issues that I think come across in this series. Number one is this girl Esti's struggle with the rules. You keep on hearing about the rules. Her mother, who herself had a hard experience with the Satmar community, and you keep on hearing the whole time about the rules. And you hear that in the context of that the rules are very stifling, they're very limiting, and do not allow her to develop her talents, which is a love for music. That's one area that comes across over here in the series. So there are a couple of angles where to get to this. One angle is that, you know, life in general is about rules. Every relationship is about rules. You're married, there are rules that define that relationship. You can't just give in to every desire you have. You cannot go and have your way with any pretty woman or handsome man, if you're female or whatever it is, attractive man. You just can't. And there's rules. You can't do whatever you want. You have to be home at a certain time. You have to spend time with your kids rather than be on TV or be on your phone. Every relationship has rules. And those rules define the relationship and make the relationship healthy, and that's where the responsibility lies in. Rules, if they're too restrictive, could definitely become an issue and a problem. Now, how do you define which rules are restrictive or not? Now, one of the ways to define it is whether you want to be in that type of relationship or that type of environment. If you don't want to be there, then almost any rule and every rule will be stifling and will be resented, etc. You know, there's the known story, the known analogy given about the two people walking up the mountain. And one person is schwitzing and kvetching and miserable, and someone asks him, "Why so miserable?" He says, "Look at these rocks that I'm carrying. They're such a burden." And the fellow says to him, "Would you want me to give you another rock?" He says, "Well, what are you, Meshuggah? I'm already struggling with this. I'm schwitzing. I can't. What are you going to give me another rock?" Absolutely not. And then there's another fellow walking up the same mountain, and he's dancing and he's singing and he has this big load, and he's joyous. And someone says to him, "What are you so joyous about?" He says, "Well, what am I saying? I'm carrying up a whole entire a bag full of diamonds. I just discovered diamonds. I'm carrying up this bag full of diamonds." And the guy said, the person asking him, he says, "Would you like me to put another rock like you have, meaning another diamond?" He says, "Sure. The more the better." So that is one way of determining if rules and so on are too restrictive or not, is where is the person that is asked to follow these rules. Rules in general, as we said, is what defines any and every relationship between parents, children, siblings, husband, wife, friends. There are rules. And when you break those rules that are the framework of that relationship, it's a violation of that love, etc. And there is no such a thing as no rules. You know, we have rules of society. That's a healthy society. Now, with that statement, if you from the beginning of this series, Unorthodox, you right away see that here is a girl, a young girl, Esti, who is coming from a very sort of shaky or unhealthy and troubled background, and she finds herself in an environment where she really does not want the rules. She doesn't appreciate that lifestyle. She doesn't love it. She doesn't appreciate, the the Torah / culture, at least of the Satmar movement. So, of course, the rules are going to be extremely stifling and resented, etc. So that's one point that I want to address. And again, you have any questions, please, feel comfortable to share or to ask. Having said that, there's another issue that is a struggle that comes across in this series, which is, as I mentioned, that here is Esti. She has talents, and the Satmar lifestyle. She has talents of music, piano, singing, and the Satmar lifestyle is not allowing her to develop those talents because it's against the rules as it's presented over there, or it's against religious values. So, I mean, that's a very good question, and it's a question that anyone in society, never mind religious, can sometimes struggle with. Let me explain. By way of analogy, is what happens if you have a child that has a talent, for whatever it might be, a talent for music, a talent for medicine, whatever it might be. And in order for them to develop their talent, they will have to develop that talent by being associated or mingling or learning from a group that is a real challenge to your values, to your core values. What do you do? What do you do? Do you encourage your child to develop those talents? Or do you tell your child the talents are great, but who you are as a person and your values and so on are more important? And so that's really the challenge that's going on over here. It's a very good question. I'm not sure that there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. So here you have a girl who has a talent, but the concern of the Satmar community and their value system is that to develop that talent, there is it will deeply challenge her value system, as her father, mother, grandmother, or aunt perceive that threat. Now, I will say for those listening over here is that it has changed, and what I mean by it's changed is my experience, personal experience of the Satmar communities as a child, up to basically age 7 and even beyond, because I have immediate families that are part of the Satmar community or sort of other Hasidic groups that are very similar to Satmar. So, but it's more as a child, and there's only so much I know. But I could see just from public productions is that, let's say, the music world specifically has very much changed, where you see many young Hasidic, when I mean not just Chabad is a whole different category, but you see many young Satmar or what we call Polish Hasidim, which is a more broader term, who are musicians, who sing, who develop their talent. And it's kind of obvious that a lot of the teachers now that teach them the music and allow them to develop their talent are those who are themselves committed to the values of Torah, of Judaism, etc., etc. So that is, I believe, and not that I've done research, and again, I don't live in the Satmar community, that has changed to some extent for the better, meaning that people can develop their talents and yet still remain true to their heritage and so on. Having said that, do I think that if a child has a talent, that the general approach should be that the child should be allowed to develop that talent? Absolutely. God gave you a talent. It should be used. It should be developed. It should be something that others can benefit from. It should be something that you can find fulfillment in life, for certain. When it's a challenge in order to develop that talent to your core values, then you have to maybe assess the child. You have to assess the strength of the child's character, and so on. So that's my thoughts on that. I think I think we'll leave it at that. So let's go a little further now. The other issue in the film, which is the issue that you sense a lot, is sort of intimacy and intimate relations and love life, and how that's played out in the what we would call the ultra-Orthodox or Satmar community. So I don't really know the answer to that, to be honest. I don't really know the answer to that. It's not something that I've really discussed. I will say that I suspect that it probably is different there's no one universal answer to that within the Satmar community. There's probably those who are more, what we would call more closed. There are those who are more opened. That's within the Satmar community. I think that maybe has changed as well, somewhat. But by and large, yes, there's probably a lack of knowledge and education, at least until you get married. Ich weiß nicht. It's okay to say ich weiß nicht. I don't really know. But there are things definitely. Look, I'm Chabad. I'm not Satmar. There's a key difference between Satmar versus Chabad. Satmar, by and large, is a very much more insular community. It's a lot of the post-Holocaust trauma is there, probably changing a little bit as we move away from that. And there is a very strong emphasis, of course, on Torah and love for Judaism, etc. Having said that, Satmar is a very insular community. They're not into outreach for the most part, and they were very, very opposed to Chabad when Chabad and the Rebbe was very strong that every Jew is a Jew and every Jew is a child of God, and we have to care for them just as much as any other Jew. Whereas, to just make it very clear, the different approach between Satmar and Chabad, Satmar was we have to basically develop our own institutions and grow our own community. Everybody else, the rest of the Jewish world, is God's problem, not ours. And almost to the extent that if you're not an observant Jew, you're almost not a Jew. And that I strongly disagree with them. Perhaps that's changed for the better, but that, and when I say I mean that's the Chabad approach totally disagrees, because a child is a child, and whether you're a behaving child or a non-behaving child, you're still 100% a child. And it's our duty and our merit to look out for every single Jew and to try to bring them a little closer to their roots, regardless of which and where they are at. So that's a fundamental difference between, I remember actually in being in Manhattan, I used to stand outside of Manhattan by the mitzvah tank, some of you might remember, like the mobile homes, and we'd stand in Manhattan and we would ask people if they're Jewish. I remember a couple of Satmar Hasidim coming to me and saying to me, how could you stand here in Manhattan where and ask Jews if they're Jewish, where there's so much immodesty around you, people are not dressed modestly, what gives you the right to do so? Go home. Don't stand here and ask people if they're Jewish and ask them if they want to light Shabbat candles or tell them, share with them a word of inspiration of Torah. Go home. And I didn't much respond, because I totally disagreed with them. They just sort of walked by in the street. And I'm thinking to myself, you're here. Why are you here? You're here because you are part of the Diamond District or whatever it is, and you're here to make a living. So to make a living, to put food on the table, that's okay. But to help a fellow Jew, to bring them a little bit holiness, to give them love, to give them to show that you care, that I shouldn't be here for. I mean, where's that coming from? So these are the areas where definitely we strongly disagree. But I want to go back to the question that we asked about the Parsha, and that also addresses what I'm going to say now, also addresses the somewhat social unrest that's going in this country, which is why I put that in the title as well. In this week's portion, we asked why is it that there is that Aharon, the high priest, is the one that lights the menorah? Why was it Aharon? So Hasidic teachings tells us, and the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson in Lekutei Sichos Volume 2 expresses this in a very beautiful way. It says like this: the menorah represents the entire Jewish spectrum, the entire Jewish nation. And I think you could even extend this beyond. You could extend this to humanity in general. That the menorah has 7 branches. When I say the menorah has 7 branches, you can all jump on me and say, well, the menorah has 8 branches. And that's good if you think so in terms of the Hanukkah menorah. But here we're talking about the menorah in the Holy Temple that Aaron the high priest would light. And that had 7 branches. 7 branches. Why 7 branches? So if you know the answer to that, give me some feedback. Give me a thumbs up if you know the answer why the menorah in the temple had 7 branches. But I'll tell you, the menorah in the temple, the Holy Temple, had 7 branches because of Jewish mysticism explains that the energy that God created the world has 10 energies, what's called 10 sfirot. 10 sfirot. These 10 are divided into 3 and 7. 3 more intellectual and 7 more emotional characteristics. And the human characteristics are divided into 7 different characteristics, which I will list quickly as Kabbalah lists them, which is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. Okay? I will explain the first 2 briefly. Chesed means kindness, and Gevura means severity, harshness, discipline. So to explain that in human terms, there are human beings that their character is primarily one of chesed, of kindness. That's where they excel, that's where they gravitate to, that's what they exude, that's what's their specialty, so to speak, that's their personality. You have people that their personality is more Gevura-like. They are more the disciplinarians, they're more the fighters, they're the ones who stand up to what's not right. They have that toughness more. And that's needed, that's necessary. So likewise, you have 7 different characteristics that comprise the Jewish people. Lighting the menorah represents that we bring out, King Solomon, as we know, says that the soul of man is compared to a fire. Neir Hashem is compared to a candle. Neir Hashem nishmat adam. That's what the soul of a man is compared to. So what does it mean that Aharon lights the menorah? Symbolically, it means that it's Aaron's responsibility. It's Aaron, the high priest's job, that he brings out the fire. He ignites the soul of every single Jew. And by extension, I would say, every single human being, as we can divide them into these 7 different categories, which, again, includes everybody. But the point is that there are 7 different categories. And this is what I want to bring out over here. Why is it Aaron and why is it 7? Now the 8 of the menorah is because of Hanukkah, just as a side point, is because we're commemorating the 8 days of the miracle of the oil. But the menorah in the Holy Temple was of 7, as the Torah, as the Bible clearly lists that there should be 7 branches. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we're not all the same, and we're not all alike, and we have different characters and characteristics, and we have different roles, and we have different purposes, and together we make one beautiful menorah. So we have those whose role and job and purpose and mission in this world is to be chesed category. Chesed are the people who are more the kind people, the people who will be in charge of social good, of charitable causes, of bringing people closer, etc. You have people who are the Gevura people. You have people who are the Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes. You have the people who are Tiferes, which are people who have more empathy, and so on. This is not the there's much discussion you could have on what this 7 characteristics are. But the point being is different roles. And further divided, every human being has different roles, which is a theme we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Aaron's job was to ignite the fire, to bring out the holy flame, the soul of all these different characters or characteristics, groups of people. And on a more broken down scale, to bring out the fire of every single individual who is meant to be different than the other individual. But why was it Aharon that lit the menorah? So here the Rebbe tells us that we know that Aharon's dominant character is, as the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, Ohevet Habriot. He loved creatures. He loved people just because they were created by God, no other quality. What does that tell us? That in order to light the menorah, in order to light and ignite the fire of every different character, it has to come from an Aaron. It has to come from someone who's a true lover. Meaning that regardless of what your mission and purpose is, and regardless who you're talking to, it has to be the tool, the first attribute, which is of all the attributes, is the attribute of chesed. And Aaron, who's the attribute of ahava, of love, a person who's being influenced, a person who you want to bring out their fire, has to feel that it's coming from a place of love. Even if you're disciplining them, they have to feel that there's an underlying place of love for you to be effective and bring out the best in the student, individual that you're trying to bring out their fire. So what does this mean practically in over here? So when we're talking about the movie Unorthodox, where people on both sides, whether you're extremely religious, that's their role and that's their purpose. And on the same time, if you're extremely religious and you see another person who's not like you, you have to be a mensch, as we discussed in the past. You cannot be a person who's nicht kein mensch. You have to be a mensch. And you have to understand that God created multiple people and they all have a role. Talking about social unrest, God created white people, God created black people, God created people with these talents, and they're all needed, and they all have a purpose, and they all have a mission, and together society of all walks of life, of all different races, of all different upbringings and so on, together we make a beautiful menorah. But it has to. There's an interesting law. There's an interesting law in the service in the temple. Most of the time, the service in the temple has to be done by one of the priests. But the lighting of the menorah, even though it is a mitzvah given to Aaron, was actually kosher, was actually allowed to be done by anybody, even if you're not a Kohen. To tell us that anybody and everybody has the ability and therefore the obligation to light someone else's fire. But nevertheless, the mitzvah is given to Aaron to teach anybody and everybody that even though you have to light someone else's menorah, you have to do it in an Aharon-like way. It has to come from a place of love and care. If you don't, I once heard an important statement from a veteran teacher who was a teacher for many, many years, and he said the following. He said that if you walk into a classroom and you don't love every single kid in that class, you have no business going into that classroom. A powerful statement. And that's true in the larger scale. That if we want to solve this social unrest that's going on in this country, it has to come from realizing that together with this, not despite our differences, we have to embrace our differences. We're meant not to be the same, because that is what together makes the beautiful menorah. But it has to come. In order to solve it, when you're going to solve the whatever differences, the people have to feel that it's coming from a place of care and love. These are simple ideas, but we so get carried away in today's environment of strife and animosity. Yes, there are sometimes evil that you have to get rid of. It is, but we're talking about, by and large, where you're coming from. What's your approach? What's your main dominant modus operandi? These simple messages are things that we have to hear and remember ourselves again and again when we interact with people. I mean, I could say over here, we've thank God had I would say the merit to be able to feed, since the COVID, had thousands of people of all backgrounds, of all religions, of all colors. For lack of a better word, I'm not here. God forbid, I don't want to offend anybody. And I would say that actually we haven't even paid attention to that. We haven't paid attention that this one is of this background, this one is of this race. Human beings. We're feeding human beings. Thank God, twice or three times a week, we've been able to secure deliveries of trucks of food. And people come from the entire city of Coral Springs and beyond. And it's human beings treating each other respectfully, helping each other, putting food into their vehicles, saying thank you, being appreciative. It's a beautiful menorah. you bring out the beautiful fire of each other. Each one of us have to have that attitude to our sort of social footprint, our life's footprint, to exude the Aharon approach of making sure to light the 7 different candles. What works for one doesn't work for the other. You have to find a way to ignite one branch at a time. You can't, it's not a one size fits all. And it has to come from a place of true love and care. That is the message of the Parsha. That's my review of my Unorthodox film. I'm not sure if I should have watched it or not. It's not everything on that film is so appropriate, especially for a rabbi to watch, but whatever. I watched it. I was asked to give reviews, so I watched it. There's definitely cultural stuff there that gets to the core. There are things in that film that are probably stereotype. I don't think maybe an over-intrusive aunt or family members or a mother who gets into helicopter parents, and these things exist in society. There are parents who are smarter, who know how to let their kids alone. But that's that we could continue talking about that. But let's suffice with what we've discussed so far. Everybody, thank you for watching. Share words of Torah. Let's each one of us. I saw a thing, research. I think what is it? I think it's called the Framingham or Farmingham. I think a Heart Institute, that a person who's in a good mood automatically affects up to 3 sort of distances from him. Meaning, if you're in a good mood, you're probably affect your friends and their friends. And if you're not in a good mood, it could have an effect up to 3 people, direct sort of almost effect up to 3 steps removed from you, and then it keeps on going, sort of like a nuclear effect. So in today's world, when there's so much darkness, let us combat that darkness, starting with ourselves and our social environment, etc. And we will make the place a better place. We will kindle that menorah until we will merit to see the menorah burning in Yerushalayim, with the promise of redemption that the prophets have promised us. Everybody, thank you for watching. Have a fantastic day and a fantastic week, and please send to me any of your questions that you have on this discussion today.